So let's start with this talk about Google Maps Android API version 2. So my name is Cyril Mottier. Just a quick introduction. Who am I? So I'm a Google developer expert. So for those who don't know what a Google developer expert is basically I'm not working for Google. I'm just promoting Google technology and in particular Android today. You can find me on Twitter at Cyril Mottier, or you can also go to my website, cyrilmottier.com. So this is what I do on my personal time. And because I'm a GDE, I have to put a disclaimer here, is that everything I'm saying in this presentation is only said by me, not by Google. So maybe I will be saying some bullshit. You have to weigh the pros and cons of what I'm saying. But sometimes Google maybe do too, but this is not. Today, what I will be saying is just about me. So this is what I do on my personal time, but professionally speaking, I work in a company, French company called Captain Train. So if you're coming from France, I'm sure you used it to come here to buy your train tickets. What we're doing basically in this startup, we're selling train tickets and trying to revolutionize the way you're using the train, so how you buy your tickets and how you travel by train. So I'm not here to talk about trains, I'm here to talk about Google Maps, as I said. And I'm sorry, but I wanted to start with a quick story of mine, a story that happened to me. And it was because I created an application, and this application was, well, you know what it is when you're creating your own application. It's always lovely and good looking. And when I'm saying it was lovely, it were really lovely. I'm not the kind of guy putting hearts like that on my presentation, so it was really lovely. And to be sure that it was lovely, so I started to, it looked like that, and I started to do some quick user testing. You know what it is? When you're creating an application, the best way to make sure that your application is usable by real users, not just by you because you're the developer of this application, is to start to do some user testing. So I found someone, well, not found, I forced someone, my wife, and she ended up saying that. So it's my wife, but she doesn't want me to talk about her, so I used John Doe. And she said it's a pretty nice list of thingy things. So it's pretty, it's nice, but it's a list of thingy things. So you probably don't know my wife as I do, but when she says something like that, it basically means that my application sucks. It's hard to listen, but you have to listen to that. And the thing is, list views and list screens are boring. This is because my application was trying to represent geographic context with list views, and that's not what list views are made for. Maps are way better for that because they can give lots of context on the location of your point of interest, the location, of course, of the user. When you know all of those locations, you may extrapolate the distances between the point of interest location and the user location, or between two different point of interests. And finally, you can also have a context of directions. And all of that is what Maps View and Maps in application are awesome. And this is where Google Maps Android API version 2 comes to the rescue, because it helps you integrate Google Maps directly inside the Android application. So I started to recreate my application, and I basically ended up with that. And that's quite funny, actually, because if you look at this screen, it's not a screenshot, it's just some lines that I've created on Keynote, and you can directly see what it represents. It represents a map with some point of interest and with a user location, and all of this to show you that maps are really great, and you have to use it whenever you want to represent some geographic context inside your application. So let's start with an introduction on the Google Maps Android API version 2. And in order to introduce the framework, I think it's important to look at the difference between the version 1 and version 2, because when you're talking about version 2, it probably means that there was a version 1. Actually, at that time, it wasn't called a version 1, it was called Google Maps External Library, and, but we can consider it as version 1. And I don't know if you've used it, but version 1 was suffering of lots of limitation. It was not possible to have more than one map view per screen. You had to use a map activity. You had to have only one map activity per process, so it was kind of a mess. And version 2 brings a lot of improvement. First, it breaks all of those limitations, and it brings some new improvements such as vector-based maps. So your maps are really scalable and awesome to look at. And that's why version 2 is actually the version that you have to use. And actually, Google decided to deprecate the old version because the old version was, well, as I said, not really usable and not as great as the version 2. So actually, you can still use version 1, but you have to use an old API key. But you can't create a new API key for version 1. So version 1 had also another problem, and this problem was that the API was quite difficult to understand. It was some notions of itemized overlay, my location overlay. All of that stuff was weird, actually, when you were developing on Android. And version 2 make this API really clear by creating a very and an extremely straightforward API. Something that is completely understandable when you are an end-to-end developer. So I'm not going to explain everything that is in the framework, but I just want to show you some of the most interesting part of the Google Maps Android API version 2. And probably one of the most asked feature was the map fragment, because it was not available in version 1. And in version 2, you can have map fragments and, of course, support map fragment when you want to use the fragment from the support library. And basically, when you want to integrate a map in your application, you have to follow this pattern. And this pattern is, well, in onCreate, you set a content view. In this content view, you have a fragment in your XML layout. And then you call a private method of yours, which is here called setupMap if needed. And in this setupMap if needed method, what I do is, if I don't have a Google Map instance, then I try to get it from my fragment. And if it's not null, then I set up map. So basically what it does, it set up the map only once. And there is something quite different from regular fragments here, is that you have to call setupMap if needed in onResume. And this is, in order to understand that, you have to understand how Google Maps works. And basically, when your application doesn't have, or your device, sorry, doesn't have the requirements to display the maps, the map view will try to download it from the Google Play Store. So your application will open up the Play Store and then download all of the requirements and then go back to your application. And when you go back to this application, you don't go through the onCreate method. You go through the onResume method. So you have to make sure that you're calling setupMap if needed in onResume, because this is where you will be called if you are coming from the Play Store, just after having downloaded all of the requirements. One of the best seller, if I can call that this way, on maps is the ability to add some markers on the map. And this is done very easily, and this is what you can see on this slide. Well, what you have to do is basically use a very straightforward method, which is called addMarker. And this addMarker method always takes a marker options. And marker option is like a bundle of properties for this marker. Here, I set the position of this marker to Lyon, which is where I live in France. I set the title of this marker. I set the snippet, City of Lights, and then I set the icon to the default icon in the red, tint. And just by doing that, when you tap on the marker, you will have the info window to be displayed. And this info window, if you remember, version 1 of the API was kind of a mess to create. Just by using version 2, you have this for free. You just have to set the title and the snippet of the marker, and the framework will do the rest. So it's really a huge improvement over version 1. Another thing that you might want to do on map views is to draw. Well, actually, you have in the framework 3 basic shapes. The first one is a polyline. So a polyline is a set of lines. So you just add some point of control, and then a line is drawn between all of those points. You can also draw a polygon, which is basically a closed polyline. And finally, you can also draw a circle. And a circle is basically a polygon made of an infinite number of polylines and control numbers. So in order to show you that, I've decided to draw Mickey Mouse on Lyon, just by using circles. And here again, the API is quite simple. You just have to use @circle with the circle options. And this circle option, you can set different properties, of course, but here I just set the center, the radius in meters, the stroke width in pixels, and then the stroke color to red in this case. There is a tiny difference, though, that is that I'm reusing the circle option. I will talk about that later, but you can reuse circle option to prevent or to avoid creating the same instance or temporary instances over and over again for nothing. So you don't be afraid of using the same circle option to add several circles on screen. Another interesting thing is the ground overlays. Ground overlays are basically when you want to draw a bitmap or an image directly on the map. To use that, you just have to use the @ground overlay method with a ground overlay option and all of the options that you want to set to this ground overlay. And finally, another interesting thing is the type provider. So if you don't like the types provided by Google, you can completely provide your own types. And this is done through a type provider. In this case, what I've done is that I've decided to show some types of mine representing the surface of the moon. And what you do here, you use the @tile overlay method, passing a type provider. And a type provider is actually an interface. And in this case, I've created a concrete type provider, which is a new URL type provider, which is provided by the framework. And basically what you do in this URL type provider is for a specific X, Y, and Z tuple. You just return the appropriate URL, and the framework will do the rest by downloading the image at the URL and displaying it whenever possible. So this was some of the interesting features of the new Android API version 2. But I think what's interesting here is to actually talk about what's not in the documentation, what's under the hood, what's not really visible at first sight. And so this is why I want to deep dive into the internals. And in order to understand that, we first need to understand that Google Maps is not a standalone framework. Actually, Google Maps is part of the new Google Play Services framework. So you've probably heard about this framework because Google have been using it quite a lot recently. And basically what Google Play Services is a way for Google to push some new content in a backward compatible fashion. So you can push, for instance, new version of Google Plus, the Google Plus framework or the Google Maps Android API to all devices. You are completely doing that in not in a synchronized way regarding Android releases. So let's take an example to show you how it works. So here I have my application. It's using Maps, so I'm basically using a library that is provided as part of Google Play Services. And when I want to add a marker or to interact with the map, what I do is that I call some methods on what I call here the Maps API jar, but actually it's a bigger jar, a jar of all of the Google Play Services methods. And this jar will then forward all of your calls to another process, which is called the Google Play Services service, which is known as the GMS service. Service for Google Mobile Service. This is the old name for Google Play Services, but actually GPS was already used, so they decided to use GMS. And then what you can do, because you're not using, you're not actually doing all of the code in my application, well, you can update the GMS service automatically just by using the Play Store. So this is quite interesting because first you can push some updates without having to, republish your own application. So for instance, let's say that there is a bug in the odd marker method. Well, Google just have to push a new version of Google Play Services. It will replace the old version, and your application will automatically benefit the fix. And whenever they're pushing new features, then you have to recompile your application by integrating the new jar and then redeploying it to the Google Play Store. So this is really one of the main advantages, that is you can publish your app with some new features without having to wait for a new version of Android, because Google is pushing that on all of the devices back to Froyo. But it has obviously one main disadvantage, that is everything that is moving from your application to the Google Play Services has to be serializable. In Android, this is called parcelable. So making everything parcelable and unparcelable is sometimes quite expensive, because you have to spend time reading some properties from some properties of your object, and then reconstruct your object. And for instance, let's look at marker option. This object implements the parcelable interface. So what does that mean? Is basically that each call to the API is done through what we call in Android a binder. So you have to parcel and unparcel everything, and it may be slow sometimes. So most of the time this is not a problem, but if you try to create a quite expensive from a resources point of view algorithm, for instance, if you want to do some clustering algorithm, then you have to think about that. Because whenever you will try, for instance, to get the position of a marker, this may take some time. It's probably better to cache the position directly in your application rather than ask the framework the position of a given marker. Another interesting things to know about is that this view, the view that displays the map, is actually quite a special view. First, actually, it's a frame layout, but do not add some subviews in it. It may be a view group, but consider it as a view. Do not add views in it, because otherwise you're getting into troubles. And the map that actually renders the map view, the maps on screen, is not what I call a regular view. And depending on the API level, it may be a texture view or a surface view. So you're probably familiar with those type of view. They are quite, special in the Android SDK, because they do not render the same as the other views. They have their own rendering pipeline, and so basically what it means is that you can't really draw on it. You don't have a draw method, so you can't draw on a Canva. You can't have access to draw line, draw point, or draw circle. All of this is not possible. What is done actually is that whenever you want to draw something on the text view, the framework will actually take a snapshot of what you want to draw as a bitmap, and then render this bitmap directly on screen. So this may lead to some out-of-memory errors sometimes, because you are using lots of bitmaps, which takes a lot of memory. And of course, it means that you're not, having the advantage of the regular rendering pipelines. For instance, the motion event, touch event rendering, dispatch pipeline is not functional, so all of this has to be dealt on yourself. So for instance, if you try to render a view inside the map view, then when the user touches it, it won't, give some feedback, because actually the user is not touching your view, but a snapshot of your view. So you have to deal with all of that on yourself, which can be kind of a pain in the ass sometimes. And finally, another interesting thing is that, if you're an Android developer, I'm sure you know about this. This is in the documentation of the view class. So basically, when you're trying to interact with a view, you have to do it in the UI thread. This is because the view hierarchy is single-threaded, and you have to do all of the interaction with the view hierarchy directly on the UI thread. And this is actually true with the Google Map object, the object that you can use to interact with the underlying map view. So if you're not doing this in the UI thread, then you will probably end up with an illegal state exception. Then we will finally finish this talk with some interesting tips and tricks that you can use when you're creating your application with Google Maps Android API version 2. And the first thing to do most of the time is to, attach some information to a marker. And most of the time, as a Java developer, what you do is that you extend the class and you add some properties to this class. The thing is, if you look at the documentation, all of the classes in the framework are final, so you can't extend it and create your own markers. This is not possible. So what you have to do is basically to create a mapping collection, so a map. So there is plenty of maps that you can use, for instance, the hash map, the linked hash map, or the brand new area map, which is part of the project Svelte, which has been released with KitKat, but is also available in the support library. And this map is basically consuming less memory than the regular hash map. It's not as efficient, but when you have less than 100 elements, it's probably better to use array map. So what we will do here is that we will create a new hash map. What I'm doing here in setup map, I update my POIs, and in this update POIs method, I will clear the marker positions, because maybe there was some previously, but I don't want to keep them now. And what I will do is actually read the latitude and longitude of all of my markers directly in the cursor. And I want to keep some data associated to those markers. And in order to prevent, loading lots of stuff into memory, and I just want to, keep the cursor around, I will only keep the position of each marker in that cursor. So whenever I want, I just have to move the cursor to the position of the marker, and I will have access to all of the other information from this particular marker. So what I do here is, I clear the map, because I want to get rid of all of the old markers. And if the cursor is not null, I create a marker option, because as I said, everything is possible, so I can create just one marker, because the marker option that I'm using is actually not the one that is used by the framework. And then I loop through the cursor, and I add a marker for each row of this cursor, just by reading the latitude and longitude of this marker. And finally, what I do is I associate some data to each marker just by putting this marker inside my map and adding the position of the marker in the cursor. So the rest of the code is quite boring and a boilerplate. If you use loaders and loader manager, you have to implement loader callbacks and implement the three methods. The first one, onCreateLoader, will create your loader, cursor loader. OnLoadFinish will be called when the framework has finished loading the cursor. What we'll do here is basically keep a reference on the cursor and update the POIs. And finally, onLoaderReset will be called when the framework wants you to, get rid of all of the references you have on the cursor. So what I do here is I set the cursor to null, and I update my POIs. So what I've said here is basically what I've called the B attitude. Be lazy whenever possible. Do not load memory, some stuff in memory if it's not useful. Be mindful on memory and be nice with users. So what I've done here is that I've put some marker on my map, but whenever the user is tapping a marker, nothing is displayed. Remember, this nice info window is not displayed because I have not set a title or a snippet. Well, you can do it lazily, just by using a set info window adapter. Set info window adapter is called by the framework when you're tapping on the marker, and you will actually set the title and the snippet of this at the appropriate moment, which is basically when the user is tapping the marker. So what I do here is I return null in get info window because I don't care about this method, and in get info contents, I will get the position of the marker in my cursor. If this position is not null and the cursor is not null, then I can move to the position of the appropriate position in the cursor, and I set the title to the marker, and I set the snippet to the marker, and I once return null because I want the default behavior to happen, and this will automatically display the info window when the user is tapping the marker. And the great advantage of that is that you're not loading all of the title and all of the snippets of all of your markers. And this may be not a big problem when you just have like 20 markers, but if you have 10,000 markers on screen, which is basically not a good thing to do because your device will like sync. If you do, then it's probably better to do that because you're lazily loading all of the information. And another interesting thing is to animate changes. Instead of going from the screen on the left to the screen on the right just by doing no transition at all, it's probably better to animate changes. Like this, for instance, you're moving the marker along a path on the map. Well, this is actually not provided by Google Maps Android API version 2 because there is no actual support for animation in the framework, so you have to do it on your own. And the solution, yeah, as I said, is to do it on your own. So there is lots of methods to do it. Basically, you have to recall the set position method over and over again. So you can use a handler and repost yourself, but this is not the modern way to do it. You can use the new animation framework provided in the framework since on Ecom. By the way, you can't use the new transition framework provided with KiCad because actually this is only for views, and as I said, map view is not a regular view. The marker is not a view, actually just a bitmap that is rendered on screen, and so you can't use the new transition animation framework. So what we want to do is to use the lower level APIs, which is basically the animation framework. So what I have to do is to create a lat lang evaluator, which will be called to evaluate the position of your marker. And basically what I do in this is quite straightforward. I just evaluate. I just have to take care of one thing, which is that when you have a map, when you're trying to represent something which is spherical, has a plane, you have one meridian on the Earth that you have to take care, which is the 180th meridian. So you have to make sure that your marker will move the shortest path as possible. So, for instance, when you are at minus 179 and 179, you just want to, your marker to cross the meridian instead of going through the entire Earth globe. And once you have it, well, you just have to first create a new lat long evaluator, a new property, so a property on the marker, which will be the position property, and you set up the marker just by adding the marker. And the interesting part here is that whenever the user is tapping on a marker, you will create this marker object, marker animator, sorry, just by using the object I've created, a marker position property, a lat longe evaluator, and you set the destination value, which is, in my case, the opposite position, and then you start the animator. But as I said, when you're using the animation framework, you're probably internally using a reflection. So you have to make sure that ProGuard doesn't change the name of the marker method, and this is done just by doing that. And if you need more, I highly suggest you to go to this URL, which is actually maintained by the Maps team, Chris Broadfoot, and you can find lots of interesting stuff like bubble generation, spherical Mercator projection, and all of that stuff is available on this website. So thank you very much, and I think I'm late. So if you have questions, I'll be available after that. Thank you very much.